Hey guys, Sydney here. Today I wanted to talk about the cognitive functions. It's such a wonderful and foundational concept, whether you've been studying this for years or you're just getting into it. I would be honored if you would review with me or learn for the first time. So, what the heck are cognitive functions? Well, it's in the name, cognitive. So, your brain, your cognition, and functions. How your cognition functions. And before I break down the pieces, I want to say, like, all of these things are within all of us. So it's not whether or not you have something or you don't. It's the degree to which you have these things. So it's like, we have a right hand, a left hand, and most of us have a dominant hand. It's not like our other hand doesn't exist. Like, I'm right-handed, but it's not like, it's like my left hand isn't there, like someone chopped it off. Like, no, I have both hands. I can use both hands, but my right hand is a lot more fine-tuned and skilled at anything I do. So keep that in mind. We're talking about strengths and weaknesses, or like, don't get ahead of yourself, Sydney. But yes, I'll just leave it at that. So again, I like to start out by saying that there are like 4 basic types of cognitive functions, and both of these have an introverted and extroverted version. So we have sensing, intuition, thinking, and feeling. 2 of these, sensing and intuition, are observational functions, and then thinking and feeling, the other 2, are judgment-making functions. Observation functions are how we take in information. It's the filter by which we observe the outside world. And then thinking and feeling, the judging functions, those are about kind of the information, the information you observe, right? It's how you sift through that information that you've observed. So that's kind of the basis of the 2 groupings. Now, what the heck is intuition and sensing? So intuition is a observation function, but it actually observes what you can't see, or what is readily observable. So it notices ideas, impressions, concepts. It notices overarching ideas. It can have gut reactions and instincts about things. And then sensing. Sensing is very tangible, practical, what's real. Now, doesn't mean the sensing people are more, what's the word? They are more realistic, but both are realistic because both are valid ways to see the world. But the sensing perspective, it's a lot more like, here are the facts, You're not going to change the fact that this pillow is soft, it feels soft. So sensing is very much focused on what you know through your body. You know it. There's no way to argue it. But intuition's a lot more subjective, and it's a lot more individualized, I guess you would say. Now, the judging functions, you have thinking and you have feeling. And thinking is essentially coming to conclusions via logic. And the feeling people, they definitely use logic, but feeling, it's a lot more people-oriented or ethics-oriented. So the thinking people are going to look at the facts and the logic and see if it adds up. and they might not care as much how it affects people. And then the feeling functions, they're like, they really care a lot about how it affects people, regardless of the logic, you know. And yes, again, don't get ahead of yourself, Sydney. Okay, so each of these, right, have an introverted and an extroverted version of themselves. So like I just said, those 4 basic, and I went over what they are. But each of them have 2 different ways that they can present. We are very complicated people, aren't we? I'll start with sensing. Sensing has introverted and extroverted sensing versions. And how is sensing introverted? Didn't we just say it was like about like what you can see in the outside world, what you can touch, what you can observe in the outside world? That is true. However, the cool thing about introverted functions is that they're always more individualized and specific than the extroverted function. The extroverted function is always going to be a little bit more broad and extensive and generalized and a lot more about what's out there. And then the introverted is always a lot more to the self, more specific, detailed, all that kind of stuff. So introverted sensing is about things that have been experienced in the past. And introverted sensors get a bad rap of being traditionalist and like a stickler for the way things should be. And while an introverted sensor definitely can be that way, they don't have to be, because it's not in and of itself tradition. It is really good at storing an experience and constantly going back to that experience as the standard of what an experience should be, in a sense. It's really good at remembering the comfort, of the blanket, your mom gave you. Really good at remembering how good that apple tasted, how wonderful the fire felt against your skin on that cold afternoon. Introverted sensing, it is sensing of the past in the present. So it's more nuanced in that way. And so if an introverted sensor loves you, they know what feels good and they want to share that with you. So a lot of times that's how tradition comes in, where it's like, oh, like every afternoon in the winter, we get around the fire with our blankets, obviously that's a silly example, but I think you understand what I'm saying. And the extroverted sensing, it's, like I said, it's extroverted. So it's really good at forgetting the future and the past. Introverted sensing kind of does this time traveling thing. But extroverted sensing, it can be completely in the present moment. Introverted sensing is a lot about comfort and balance and peace, but extroverted sensing, it's likes to push the boundaries. It's like risk taking. It's adventurous. It's hedonistic. It's all about what can I get my hands on, right? I want all the pleasurable sounds, all the pleasurable feelings, tastes, everything. So introverted sensing, it's a lot more reserved because it cares more about, what's stable and what's good and comforting, and in the long run is going to create a pleasant experience. But extroverted sensing can be impulsive, and it's not thinking about how it's going to influence the past or the present. Pretty interesting. I think a good example would probably be I'm out of good examples apparently. Extroverted sensing is often compared to high level athletes. They're completely in the present. They're focused on like what the ball's doing or what their opponent's doing, and they know intuitively how to respond to that in their body. That's a thing I should talk about. The extroverted sensor is very, very aware of how to use their body in the real world. They're very kinesthetic. It's not necessarily true that they are aware of their body, as in aware of, you know, their limitations physically, because they can push through pain really well and they can forget they have like a human body. They think they're indestructible, but they know how to use their body. An introverted sensor, they're really good at noticing when something's a little different. They can sense, you know, even the slightest bit of temperature change, even the slightest bit of difference in taste. I had the pleasure of working for an introverted sensor, and she loved like cooking, and she was so good at determining like, oh, that's different than last time. And I'd be like, oh, I just thought it tasted good, you know? So an introverted sensor is really good at noticing changes in details. And an extroverted sensor, you know, they're just like, what pain, what change? So that's kind of extroverted, introverted sensing. So we covered sensing. I'm not going to make this video too long, Sydney, okay? So intuition, so introverted and extroverted intuition. So introverted intuition, if intuition is about ideas, right, and concepts and impressions of things, and then introversion is more like, you know, detailed in the subjective, more specific. Then introverted intuition would be a concept boiled down, if that makes sense. So an introverted intuitive, they love the idea that everything is the same idea, if that makes sense. And I, as an EFJ, have this second. So like, I can definitely be a nerd about like, oh, everything in the universe relates to the concept of love. You know, everything, every atom in all of existence, like comes together, blah, 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 together to form the idea of like harmony, right? I love that kind of stuff. So an introverted intuitive is super, super good at understanding how all these different ideas are like the same thing. So usually writers, a lot of them are intuitive, but a lot of writers out there are introverted intuitives. They're concise with their concepts and ideas. Extroverted intuition, on the other hand, it loves bouncing around with ideas. So it's not so much concerned with connecting everything to the same idea. It's very excited to like start with an idea and then go to another idea and another one. And they actually see them as different ideas. They're not trying to unify them necessarily. Depending on other functions they have, they might be trying to draw a conclusion with those concepts, but it just loves concepts. So think of extroverted sensing. Extroverted sensing like loves to get its hands on like everything, every awesome experience it can have. Extroverted intuition is the same, but with concepts. So it wants to like explore every idea possible. It's very hedonistic for ideas. And that's why like an introverted intuitive might like bore them or frustrate them, because that intuitive just wants to focus on one idea, you know, and then the extroverted intuitive is like, but look at all these ideas, you know. So they're usually very, what's the word, open-minded, you know, optimistic, and exploratory, like I said. And they can be very innovative as well. So those are the observational functions. And then we have thinking, the introverted and extroverted version of both of those. I'm actually going to start with extroverted thinking for this one, because I think it does a better job of explaining the opposing function. So extroverted thinking is what makes sense to most people. It's also like what works in the real world. So it's very practical. It's not so much concerned with flawless logic, endless lines of reasoning just for the sake of accuracy. It's a lot more excited about building systems, or building systems of logic, and just reusing that over and over and over, because they don't want to like take the time to like take apart everything logically. They're more excited about like moving on with things, if that makes sense. So a good example of an extroverted thinker is like a scientist, right? Like a chemist, because you're doing experiments and you have all these like formulas and all these like standards of doing things. You know, you're reasoning through things, but you're using these systems to help you reason. And it's a lot more effective. You're getting results, right? You're getting observational data you can write down. And it's you can see it, right? You can observe it. Other people could be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And we can all come to the same conclusion. So I think one other thing I would like to say is, once again, the systems that extroverted thinking likes to use. They really enjoy, I would say, programs. Is that the best I can come up with? Programs, because programs ensure that you're coming back to this thing that runs itself, and because it runs itself, you're not spending so much time constantly reworking it and rehashing it. But the extroverted thinker is not going to hesitate to throw out that system if it sees it's not getting results anymore. And that's a big thing with extroverted thinking. It's very results oriented. Are we getting the results or are we not? If we're not, they're going to throw out the logic they were using, and they are going to piece together some other logic that gets results. So in opposition to that is introverted thinking. Introverted thinking cares so much about accuracy. It does not care if its logic gets results or not. It needs to know that it flawlessly fits together. It's kind of like algebra. Yes, you're trying to like trying to get a result as in X equals Y or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, algebra actually isn't about results. It's about things equaling out. So introverted thinking wants to make sure every single piece fits absolutely perfectly. And if it doesn't, it has to like do it all over again, like algebra, right? You mess up one thing and you got to start over. So introverted thinking is ruthless with everything adding up. And if something doesn't add up, you got to rework it and redo it. So introverted thinking can be very time consuming. As an ENFJ, I have this last. So I'm compelled to use it, but I'm also not skilled at using it as an inferior function. So, but the higher up you have it, the better you are at like, what's the word? Being very, very, very separate from things. So you're so logical that you're like kind of detached from other things a lot of times. People's dominant introverted thinkers can have a hard time relating to people on an emotional level, because for them, like, this is the logic, this is the flawless logic. Like, I'm not gonna let a feeling get in that and make my logic biased, because logic is unbiased. So yes, introverted thinking is ruthless, and it will not tolerate any level of biases, even its own bias. Yes. Okay, last one. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me and my little rabbit hole brain. Feeling Feeling is about people, and it's about ethics and values. So you have extroverted feeling and introverted feeling. I'm going to start with extroverted feeling again because it makes a little bit more sense to start with. So extroverted feeling is about how other people feel. And it's also about what helps everybody get along, and it's very need-based. So how are we going to fulfill everyone's needs? How are we going to get everyone's needs met? So the extroverted feeling function, it's not necessarily selfless, but it forgets itself, if that makes sense. And if Molly isn't happy, then I'm not happy, right? If Fred isn't happy, I'm not happy. So extroverted feeling makes decisions based on how other people feel. At its worst, it is like living to make other people happy. Then you have introverted feeling. Introverted feeling is a lot more, I mean, as an extroverted feeler, I respect it so much because introverted feelers, they're like so authentic to themselves. Unlike the introverted thinker, they understand emotions, but they are also like ruthlessly true to themselves. So the introverted feeler is very, very, very in tune with how they feel about things. Their values, their ethics, like all the different feelings that they have, they know them and they experience them. And someone else's feeling will matter to them. But they always like have to answer the question of their own feeling first, if that makes sense. And they can empathize as much, if not more, than an extroverted feeler, but they kind of have to they do this thing kind of called mirroring, where they see that you're sad, and they kind of remember that the sadness in them, and then they feel your sadness through their own sadness. That's kind of how that works. And then an extroverted feeler will be like, you're sad, I'm just sad now, and the extroverted feeler is very real-time emotion based. So, anger is a big thing for me. If someone's angry at me or someone else, I just feel it immediately. And all I can feel is the effect of that person's anger if I'm around them. But if I can get away from them, that feeling can kind of go away for me because it's very environmental and external. But an introverted feeler, they'll take feelings with them. Not that I am very tongue-tied. Not that extroverted feelers won't take emotions with them, but introverted feelers, they really, really, really take them with them. And just getting away from the environment doesn't necessarily help them get away from that emotional experience, if that makes sense. Yes. I think last thing about introverted feeling is that it's it can have a hard time sometimes getting out of its own head, So I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the Enneagram, but Enneagram 4 is a pretty good explanation of introverted feeling. And don't misunderstand what I'm saying. There's lots of Enneagram 4s that are not dominant introverted feelers. I'm just saying at baseline, they explain each other well. The 4, Enneagram 4, can tend to really get in their emotions, and not move into action until they work through their feelings. And so, and the Enneagram 4 can also just wallow in their feelings, regardless of how it affects anyone else, because it's their feeling. They have to be true to their feeling. And then it's the same thing with introverted feeling. Again, not all Enneagram 4s are introverted feelers, but so that kind of is that overview of all the cognitive functions, if you were counting, that in total is 8 cognitive functions. You start out with 4 basic ones, and then you give, each one 2 types, and that equals 8. One other thing I'd like to say is if you're really new to this, I probably lost you because I kept talking about if you are an extroverted sensor, if you are an introverted feeler. What I meant by that is all of these 8 cognitive functions combine to create the 16 MBTI types. And for example, if I'm saying like this person is an introverted feeler, what I'm saying is they're either INFP, ISFP, ENFP, or oh my word, Sydney. Yes, no, ESFP. So my point is that you are considered what's the word for it? I'll have to make another video. This is getting way too long. The point is that when I say that you are a X user, I'm saying that it's in your top 4 function stack. That is what I'm trying to say. And again, I will make more videos because Myers-Briggs is so complicated and it's really difficult to do it justice without making a 10-hour video, obviously. But I really, really, really hope that this was in some way helpful to you or in some way refreshing to you. I would love for you to leave comments about some of the ways you would explain the cognitive functions, some of the ways you've experienced your function stack. It would be super fun to read it and respond to it. Okay, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you so much for watching and being here with me, and I hope you have a beautiful day. And it's about to be Christmas, so have a Merry Christmas. Bye.